Hey Alex, how you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good, very well. We're live already, by the way. I just emailed you
Oh,
before that
okay.
I'll already be
Awesome.
live,
Very
but
cool. I was going to ask you about adjusting my plans. It's here for today.
okay, nice. It's actually a little cut off where you are, but I don't know if you want the plant in the shot, but no, you're looking good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Good, yeah, very well, very well. Thanks for coming to talk to me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a while since we have been in the same place in person. But I've been following kind of what you've been doing since then.
Nice, awesome. Yeah, thank you very much. You're someone who's been in uh, in the cultivated meat world since it's been a world, really, aren't you?
Yeah, well, maybe the world after the world. We were actually just talking about how the history has so many different phases.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Well, that's actually, I was going to kick off by asking you about your kind of assessment of where the world is at the moment. I want to come on to talk. We're going to talk about your book, um, but yeah, as someone who's been around for at least 10 years in this space, very very more than that.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
What's your
no,
assessment of kind of
almost. I
where we
think
are?
yeah. So 2017, I think, is when we started looking into this. Assessment of where we are. I think what I always like to kind of say is that we have never been so close to having cultivated meat to reality. I'll use cultured meat, cultivated meat. You'll hear me say that sometimes, even a cultured, cultivated. But we've never been so close to having cultivated meat to reality than we are today. And I think the idea of what the final product is has kind of changed. But yeah, we've never been closer than we are today. And I'm excited to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, please. I mean, I feel like there's been phases. People used to talk about the hype cycles, right? Where there'd be everyone thinks it's within a year, and then it kind of falls off somewhat, and there's like roadblocks that come up, and then we keep looking at barriers that people think exist, and then keep getting smashed through. Is how it seems to me. There's been a ton of like price predictions. It'll never get below this price, and then it does. It'll never get to price parity, and then it does. We're just reading the other day about the cell density thing, which a company in South Korea now has made cultivated meat that has twice the cell density of conventional meat. So there's all of these predictions that keep not coming true from the doubters.
Yeah, I think if you look at, since 2017, 2018, and maybe it'll help to kind of talk about the history a little bit, because regulation is actually a big part of that. In 2018, I remember going to and I spoke about this with Mike Wolf on a podcast earlier this month, but in 2018, I went to open hearing for USDA, FDA to talk about these types of technologies. And that was kind of like my first foray into anything political about this. But if you think about it, just the fact that they had that meeting is actually a milestone, right? And so if you think about everything it takes to get any type of cultivated meat product into stores, it has taken a lot of little steps, a lot of a lot of little steps to get to where we are. Is it everywhere now? I don't know. I think, if you look at the history, 2018, there was 2015 was when Upside Foods was founded. Before that, Modern Meadow. But 2018 is when you started seeing a huge rush of companies. Shortly after that, there was like maybe 70, 80 companies in the space working on this technology. And then there was, of course, even more of a ramp up. But back then, nobody was even talking about having a hybrid product. I think the concept was that if you can make cultivated chicken, it's going to be exactly the same as a regular chicken breast. But I think if you look at it a little bit deeper in terms of food science, actually, you'll know that maybe that's not even what you might want. There's other things that can improve things like texture or the way it's cooked, the way it's packaged, the way it's stored. And so I think ultimately where we are today kind of shows that this type of product is going to be another really excellent product that could be on the store shelves that allows you to be a little bit experimental. And not to say that it's not going to allow you to have a one-to-one product, or it won't have as much of animal welfare implications, but it's going to be different. It's going to be unique. It's going to be something that is going to be exciting to cook with. And we'll talk about the cookbook later, but that really kind of comes down to our perception of what cultured meat or cultivated meat was. Since 2018 has changed a lot. There was this kind of idea that hybrid is like a huge a huge milestone to make hybrid products, but in reality, that was just going to be the name of the game. So maybe it's easier said after the fact, but the hybridization of things, and then of course the technology itself is like, can you scale it? Well, what we saw recently was a lot of companies that have raised a lot of money, who had actually touted that they could have these massive scales. They have now shuttered. So I think there's a lot of nuances to it, but I will say that despite kind of the companies closing or regulatory bans that are taking place, we've never been closer to having products like these on shelves than today, and it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I don't personally get too disheartened by some of the closures and like ostensible failures, you could say, in terms of particular companies, because there is a piece of this where it's like that is kind of an inevitable part of any new technology, right? Where it's you'll get a lot of startups trying to do the thing, and investors and the public aren't quite clear which one of them is going to be able to do it or do it well. And there's a lot of like internet companies that went bust in the dot-com bubble, but that didn't mean that the internet was a bad idea, for example, right? So you do see, and they tend to be like the stories that get a lot of attention now, I think, when companies are closing down, and right, like these companies didn't achieve what they thought they would. But it seems that is against a backdrop of really steady progress in the science and in the regulation as well. Like you were just talking about that first regulatory hearing in the States, which, yeah, that seems like a long time ago now. Hey, and now there's cultivated meat being sold in the States. I just saw the guy from Justin from Wild Type the other day, and they're selling cultivated salmon in restaurants. They said they're shipping it to restaurants every week. They're getting reorders. Like, it's happening. It's not on a very large scale yet, but it's totally happening.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you want, right? You want kind of a slow rollout of these technologies. So it kind of makes sense to kind of see what products people like, what they would like to change about it, and kind of go from there. I think, yeah, the fact that you can go to a restaurant without having either crazy long lines or crazy expensive costs, right? And try it not just in the US, but in other parts of the world, is a huge milestone. And I think one thing that is also kind of a little bit of a misconception, because some of those earlier, this is like 2013, 2015, even 2018 reports, were always talking about the 100 or 200 or $300,000 burger patty, right? And so a lot of times when I'll talk to people about cultured meat products, they'll say either one of two things. They'll say, oh, I buy them from time to time, and they're really talking about plant-based, like Impossible or Beyond. Or they'll say, oh, it's just way too expensive. And it's really not the kind of, and we can go into, what expensive actually means, because of course there's still a lot of these companies are still in research development. Nobody's producing it as hugely large scale yet. So it is subsidized, so to speak, in that way. But it's not something that's completely out of reach anymore.
Yeah. We were looking the other day at the Vow products that you can get in the supermarket in Australia, which I'm not sure if there's any supermarket products being sold in the States yet, but they're very reasonably priced. They're like, I think it was like 30 Australian dollars. That's about £15, about 20 US dollars, I guess, for like a box of them frozen. I'm thinking, I mean, quail is what they make. It's not something that we have here, so I don't really have a frame of reference for how much it ought to cost, but it was certainly way less than I was expecting in any case. And they're selling volumes as well. They said at a conference recently that over 100,000 people have had their products, which I thought was crazy.
That's a crazy number. When in the early days, we would talk about if you've tried cultured meat, it's kind of like landing on the moon. Right?
Yes.
There's only a handful of people that have done that. That's definitely not the case anymore.
Yeah, it's not that exclusive a club anymore. I only got to eat it for the first time last year at a couple of tastings, which they're allowed to do for research and development purposes in Europe. But I'm guessing that you've had some cultivated meat dishes at this point.
It's so the first time I had cultivated meat was in 2018, and that was New Age Eats, which at the time was actually called New Age Meats. And I remember being so excited, right? It was a very exciting thing. And I'd love to tell this story because in 2018, it was still kind of like this huge, mystery. Like, what do these products look like? And everybody had seen the burger from 2013, but only 2 people had tried it, right? The critics. And in 2018, I show up at this brewery in San Francisco, and ironically, we've been hosting a lot of meetups and happy hours at the new location of that brewery lately. But I show up at this brewery in 2018. There's like 40 so folks there, and 3 tiny little bratwursts. and so everyone's thinking like, are we gonna try it actually? Because only 3 of these little bratwursts. But surely enough, they were able to kind of cut it. I don't think all 40 of those.
A tiny little sliver like that.
Tiny little sliver. It reminds me of growing up. There's this like Mickey Mouse. There's this like Mickey Mouse cartoon.
I know
like
exactly
Mickey
the
Mouse
thing you're talking about. Yeah,
correct. And they're like cutting the bread. It's like see-through.
Yeah.
But it didn't matter, right? It was still so exciting to like try that. And to kind of be part of the future, right? And that was definitely not the first tasting, but that was kind of the first time I was able to try it, and it kind of gave you a sense of, oh wow, okay, this is reality. Now, if you look back on that moment, it tasted very porky, and I do eat meat, so I was kind of familiar with that porky flavor. I don't know if they used actual pork fat to fry it up, in which case, if you were doing that to a potato, then the potato would taste porky too, right? But that was besides the point, right? Nobody was asking really how many percentage is this, or are you using any animal products in it? Just the idea that they were creating something that came from the cells of a pig, that was just so cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow, 2018. So you really were one of the first men on the moon in that sense. Hey, that's early days. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was early days, and I want to contrast that to maybe a couple years later. I showed up to this tasting, and this was from Orbillion, and I think they have the video on YouTube from the tasting or something like that. But again, I heard that there would be like 40 or so people at this tasting. They would do it in like 3 different waves. I was super excited, but then when we got there, they mentioned that not everybody's going to be tasting. And I thought, oh, okay, that's a bummer. At least, we can kind of see what's happening. And they said, we're going to have 3 different types of cultured meat here. We're going to have, I think it was a Wagyu, an elk, and then one last one was like I don't know, maybe lamb or something. I don't remember. And elk is like not something people are typically eating, right? It's like, it's kind of, I don't know if I had ever had elk or anything like that. And so we show up and there's like 40 or so people there, and they're like, oh yeah, not everybody's going to be tasting. There'll just be one person tasting at each of these 3 sessions.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting. And they said, okay, Alex, are you ready to do the tasting?
No way.
And I'm like, what? Yeah. So I sat there and they bring, before we had that tiny sliver, and here they bring, 1 plate at a time. And it's not a huge amount of food, but they'll bring 1 meatball, the Wagyu meatball or whatever it may be. And I have like 39 other people just looking at me. And I'm thinking like, oh, okay, should I cut this in 4ths or something?
Yeah, you can sliver that.
Right. But no, it was about kind of having that full tasting experience. And so So, wildly contrasting, but really exciting to kind of, and this is probably 20, I don't know, maybe 2021 or something at this point. And it was just so crazy to kind of see how far we've come, and how so many companies were there. Around that time, I think I had also tried the wild type for the first time. I just got lucky and signed up on their mailing list, and was invited to a restaurant in San Francisco, and that was just such a cool experience, because that was the first time I was able to try it in a restaurant setting. And everyone it was a small kind of sushi restaurant in San Francisco, and there was maybe 8 to 12 seats. So everyone was trying it. Not that it was a huge group of people, or the restaurant was actually full, but it was a small restaurant. And that was just so cool, because people were just having their regular conversations while eating cultivated, salmon. And
Yeah.
that was to me kind of like a, wow, we're kind of living in the future. And sometimes I think about that moment, and I think, I wonder if one day I'll be, we'll be sitting on a SpaceX or Blue Origin rocket, like going to the moon, looking out and seeing planet Earth, and thinking probably not much of it, similar to like when you're on an airplane now and looking down at planet Earth. It's kind of a crazy thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's so cool. I like how you described the restaurant scene. I mean, that is like something that I've often heard from people after eating cultivated meat. Um, is almost like underwhelming how normal it is ultimately. I don't know if you saw the recent Mr. Beast tasting the cultivated meat. He's like, yeah, it's chicken. Like, it doesn't hardly react, right? It's like very cool. He sees the factory and everything, but their eating experience itself is like just deeply familiar, and you said he couldn't tell the difference. They had a real chicken nugget and a cultivated chicken nugget, and yeah, he said they couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah, and I mean, that was a big piece of chicken, right?
Right.
And one thing that was a little bit strange about that tasting is they said that the other chicken had been slaughtered that day, and I don't know if that was actually true, but that was kind of a
Mm.
weird thing to me that they would say that. Um,
Yeah, that is weird. I didn't pick up on that. You have to admit.
yeah,
I suppose that's almost never the case when you're eating chicken that you bought in a supermarket. Hey.
right. Yeah. So I don't know, but perhaps they had, because I think there was another YouTube chef there, and maybe they wanted to say, hey, let's get the highest of quality ingredients,
Right.
because Upside Foods is also a high quality ingredient.
Yeah, yeah. That's very cool. Yeah. No, it was like chicken burgers, wasn't it, that they had? Yeah, that was awesome. Um, I'm really optimistic about the science getting there and the technology getting there, and it's kind of like we're saying, it's come on leaps and bounds. Everyone used to talk about the $300,000 burger, and I think after that there was a headline some years later where it's about $11,000 for a meatball or something like this. Like, it really, has come on in the time that you and I have both been working this area. And in some areas the regulation has come along for the ride and come along well as well. Like Singapore, Australia, and the States, it's approved and you can buy and eat cultivated meat. But at the same time, there are some areas where it's not going so well from a regulatory perspective. There's a couple of countries in Europe and a few states in the US which have banned cultivated meat, sometimes before it's even on sale. What do you make of all of that?
Yeah. So I think that, I don't want to say that these bans are good, right? But I think some level of extreme scrutiny is good, right? Because it will kind of push everyone to really show proof that this is actually something not to be worried about. Um, I don't know if you look at the facts, there's any reason to actually ban it. And of course, it's a huge headache and probably very costly to kind of scrutinize it so much and to kind of show proof. But I believe that we'll get past the bans, and a big part of that will be consumer perception. I think you might agree on that. But um, I think the bans being able to provide kind of a new level of scrutiny and proof that it's fine to consume, I think is an important and natural step of any type of new technology. Sometimes the technology can catch up way faster than anyone can even think to regulate it, right? We see that a lot in tech. Maybe you can call that the wild, wild west.
Hmm.
But I think the cultivated meat industry intentionally doesn't necessarily want to have a wild, wild west, because in the West, people get harmed, right? Um, and we have a very good example of that kind of thing right now in tech in Silicon Valley. There's a new agentic technology out there that everyone, at least in San Francisco, is talking about, called OpenClaw. And there was a trademark dispute, so they had to kind of move some things around, and I think hackers stole $16 million through a crypto scheme, right? And so AI, for example, is something that needs a lot of regulation, but we are kind of in a wild, wild west of AI. I wouldn't say that similar to walking out of a sports arena and seeing folks selling hot dogs on a push cart. That's kind of wild, wild west-ish, right? But nobody's doing that with cultivated meat, right? And I think for good reason. So yeah, I think that the companies have kind of decided to play it safe, also because they don't want to get in trouble or anybody to get hurt. Not to say that anybody could get hurt, but you even make sprouts the wrong way and you could feel pretty sick. So anytime you're dealing with food, it's a little bit important to kind of stay out of that wild, wild west territory.
Yeah, I think people are reassured to know that there's a robust process for regulating. And one thing interesting that I've noticed, like all of the places that I've read about that have done these cultivated meat bans, there's actually never even a pretense that it is like health and safety or scientific reason behind it. Is more often than not someone in an agricultural state saying this is it's protectionist, right? This is going to protect the ranchers and everything else. And it's so too in Italy they talk about food heritage and culture, and it's not, they don't really even mention safety. It's just saying on the face of it, like, this is, we want to protect our ranchers, we want to protect the farmers, and we want to protect the food heritage and stuff like that. So I think it's interesting to like look at the reasons why those are going on, and it seems it's kind of contradictory in some states in America, because those same states will also be the most sort of freedom loving, right? Texas with the cultivated meat ban and stuff like this. It's not really their style to be having big government wading in and banning consumer products and making decisions about your life for you and stuff like that. So it'd be kind of interesting to see how that all plays out politically, because I can see it's a bit of a conflict. It's a bit of a conflict for people in those states who are kind of that way inclined.
I'm not producing cultured meat myself in any way, right? I'm not part of a company or anything like that, but it's a little bit flattering to those who are, right? That they'll see this as actually such a big threat. So in a way, it's a little bit flattering. But we have seen such a huge kind of I don't want to say footprint, because that's the wrong word, but we have seen a huge splash that companies in the plant-based sector have made. So that probably primed them to say, hey, this is another thing we need to watch out for before these giants take our market share, which I don't know if they're even thinking about that now.
Yeah, that's true. The biggest compliment that you could give to me is try to take down my YouTube channel because you're worried about the competition for the Cultured Meat podcast.
Yeah.
So you've actually done a ton of interviews. I want to say hundreds, at least dozens of interviews with cultivated meat professionals, and you do the Cultured Meat Symposium that you've hosted several times as well. So you're very much at the center of this world in many ways. And you've seen those conversations changing over the years and everything else. It's Yeah, it's a very cool thing to see. When you're having those conversations, you are building up a picture of the industry maybe more intimately than I want to say almost anyone, because there's also this interesting phenomenon where because so much of the cutting edge science is private trade secrets within companies, there's not anyone at the top of those companies who necessarily knows what's the cutting edge of the next company over and so on. So you are, as somebody who's spent a lot of time speaking to the top people in all different companies, you really know what's going on in many ways.
Well, I think, yeah, I think, I mean, there's this different level, not being kind of a competitor to these companies. I think that definitely changes things. And although I will say a lot of people have kind of let me into their doors and kind of shown me what they're doing, even though the industry in general can seem like it's kind of closed off, a lot of the founders that were in the space or are in the space, I actually know them as friends. And so, maybe they're not going to be sharing scientific protocols with each other. But for the most part, have kind of built really good relationships to kind of share what they're doing. One funny thing about that I'll mention, and I'm sure it's totally fine. But somebody had showed me their setup, and they were just about to move into a new facility, and we were kind of looking at some of their bioreactors, and some of their kind of their operations and their equipment. And it was a little bit of an older building, and there was like a readout on the display, and this guy's like, "Alex, stand here." So I stand there, and the readout completely changes, right, about the thing on the table. And then he's like, "Now stand there." And I move over there, and then the readout changes again. I'm like, "Oh, should that be happening?" And he's like, "No, the floor is sagging. So if you stand here, it'll completely change all
Oh
of the
no.
parameters." And so, they ended up moving to like a super modern facility that didn't have that problem. But it's just kind of, interesting to kind of see that everyone is here every day going to work on something that they're so excited about with the resources they have. And I think at the surface level it might seem closed off, but if you kind of dig a little bit deeper, like, everyone is really going towards that same mission. And that's, I think, something that's kind of cool about it.
Yeah, for sure. It's a very mission driven field. Um and yeah, I think
And,
there's
and I want to say being mission driven has possibly been one of the reasons why uh, we've had some startup failures, right? Because there were a lot of people who were not businessmen or women by any means, uh, starting companies, um, because they just believed in the mission so much. Maybe they had the science background, or maybe they just really wanted this to be a reality. And not to say that they, that was the reason the companies shut down. But any type of business is hard. So if you don't have that level of expertise, especially in the food industry, where there are things like expiration dates or minimum order quantities and all this kind of stuff, it becomes a very difficult business to run.
Yeah, yeah, and also in investors as well. Like, there's a lot of impact investors who, likewise, they like us. They're just like very keen to see this succeed and wanting to fund things and so on. And I guess that does lead to an environment where there's companies getting funded out of enthusiasm that perhaps in another sector wouldn't be. But I think I get the sense now that we're moving towards, the ones who have with any kind of new tech, we have a lot of startups and some of them fail. The ones who survive and have survived so far, these are the ones with a bit more gas in the tank and a bit more underneath the table to, actually bring these products to market and have understanding of the science and understanding of the mission and an understanding of the business and have the right people in the right positions and so on. So there's certainly there's been a robust check on all of those things in the last couple of years when it has been harder for some of these companies to get funding and so on. But yeah, now the kinds of achievements and milestones that a lot of these companies are seeing really are, impressive. And like I said, there's many milestones I think that have been smashed straight past that we thought just 5 years ago that might be impossible. So yeah, I feel it's been a hell of a roller coaster in many ways in the industry, but I do feel it's coming to a more mature stage, I guess, of investments and technology, and the companies that are still around now have really got something to show, I think.
Yeah, and I think we were earlier talking about like what the actual product will be, right? And this kind of the introduction of this idea of hybrid products. But I think that just because a product is not 100% sells is not a problem at all, right? You look at Good Meat 3 released in Singapore, and 3% might sound very low, but I think that was the first time any company has very transparently mentioned that this is the percentage of sales that we want to have. And I think even Sci-Fi Foods, which kind of built this narrative around, we're going to be more affordable because we're hybrid. I don't know if they gave a percentage, right? And so the idea that they'll go out to market and say this is Good Meat 3, and there's speculation about why they ended up doing that or whatever it may be, but the fact that they kind of did that and is available for sale, allowing anybody to go there and purchase it, I think that was maybe one of the best things that could happen for the industry. And I think even if we go into scale or market or whatever it may be, having a 3% cultivated meat and 97% plant-based, or even, let's say, add 50% of real meat in there, right? I think that would be totally fine, because it's still reducing the need for actual animal product. So I think looking at the products and thinking that it's okay for it to be 3% or 5% or 10%, because the end result will still be just as satisfying. Nutrition is a whole different topic, but it could be just as satisfying. Then I think that's totally fine.
Yeah, I agree. And the cultivated meat that I had last year was Mosa Meat's cultivated beef burgers, and it was mostly a plant-based scaffold, I guess, and the cell inclusion, I would say, it was between 10 and 30%. It was certainly not more than 50%. And when I learned that, as I'm sure many people have the reaction, I was a bit like, oh, okay, well, that's a little bit underwhelming. But then when I ate it, they had 100% plant-based patty for comparison, and then the one that was about, I think it was about 30% cultivated meat cells, and 70% plant-based. And the difference is crazy. It blew me away. Even at that very modest inclusion rate, I was like, wow, I haven't had beef for years, and now this is like very familiar. It's very it was totally different to the plant-based patty that they had. And I guess that got me thinking, like, I guess, yeah, that small amount of inclusion can really make all the difference in terms of the actual flavor profile and the eating experience. It was really quite something. Like, eating it for the first time is crazy. I think a lot of people have that experience. Invariably, the people that I've spoken to have had it become more supportive after tasting it, because it becomes like, well, that was now seems like something kind of weirdly normal that I did, and why would I've thought this is scary or bizarre before, right? And you have it, and it's like, well, that was a beef burger. But
yeah, and I think the entire ick factor, right, is just because it sounds new, right? And if you look at it, I'm sure you've heard the argument often that traditional animal agriculture has a lot more ick factor than a sterile lab environment that's suitable for USDA and FDA approval and other types of regulatory bodies. Like it's a no-brainer there. But yeah, I think once you try it, then it kind of opens your eyes that, hey, this could be, I would buy this, right? And I think some people even say that, hey, I would buy this.
Yeah. Yeah, we're yet to see the Mr. Beast episode where he does a tour of a factory farm or an abattoir or something, right? I think that'd be a bit of a different viewing experience. Um, but I want to talk about your book. You've written before a book about cultivated meat, a children's book about cultivated meat, and now the cookbook. So yeah, tell me about your experience in writing those and why the cookbook now.
Yeah, so I have so this is the children's book. And it's called Where Do Hot Dogs Come From? Because we wanted people to look at that, especially in children's book format, and say, like, why would they share this with children, right? These are some extremists right here. And you go through the story and you'll see, oh, there's nothing gruesome about it. In fact, we kind of showcase the lab, and then how exciting it could be to have a butcher that has just plant-based, and at the time cell-based was a very popular word, so that was kind of like a nice way to compare it. And the idea was that, and this was, we did this in Kickstarter in 2021, and in 2021 we thought, okay, realistically, when is this product going to be available everywhere? And at the time, all of the conferences, Cultured Meat Symposium included, people would go on stage and they would say, this is going to be available in the next 2 to 3 years. You'll be able to get it everywhere. We'll probably keep it next to the plant-based meat and actual meat products because that's where it belongs. Already talking about where it's going to be on the grocery shelves. And in reality, we would then go to the ISCCM, the International Scientific Conference on Cultured Meat, or better known as the Maastricht Conference, and people would really kind of showcase their technology and say, maybe in the next 10 years we can figure this out, or maybe in the next 5 years this will lower costs, which would get us to the next phase, right? Science and research takes a long time. And so we thought a children's book would introduce people to the idea that when they would eventually get to the point of being in the age of 12 to 18, where they're starting to make their own food purchasing decisions, they'll look at this technology and be like, oh yeah, of course we can make meat this way, I want to try it too. And so that was kind of the idea, to target children, and showcase the story in a way that's interesting for children. And when we wrote this book, I was not a father. Now I am.
Oh,
And
congratulations.
I would probably do a lot of things differently, just from a children's book perspective. But we learned a lot about printing. This is actually a soft cover version. We also have a hardcover version. This was kind of a new experience for us to print something. And so this is how we actually simplified it. This was from a TED Talk from Jonathan Bramhar, who at the time was a engineer at Mosa Meat, who kind of created a machine that would walk you through the process. And we thought this was a very good way to explain it to children. You can kind of see the cells growing there. And so we printed that book, had great success. Aleph Farms, a company out of Israel, was one of the highlighted companies. And so they really wanted to help us distribute this book, and they translated it to Hebrew. So that was a very rewarding experience. And then I thought that now that the products are starting to come to market, right, and go into Singapore and purchase it, you mentioned Australia. In the US, we've had some limited releases with Mission Barnes Meatball at grocery stores. And so, now that we're starting to see that this is something that you can actually cook with at home, it would be really exciting to kind of create the next step to this, which would be a cookbook for children or teenagers. That was at least the thought process. And so I started kind of going towards this idea, and I have a mock-up of the book here,
Nice.
A Scientist's Cookbook. This is mostly blank pages, so it's very thin. And I'll talk about the Kickstarter in a little bit, but I thought it would be very interesting to really showcase that you can cook with a lot of these products in the same way that that you can cook with real food, and it doesn't have to be some kind of foreign or strange type of thing. And specifically, there was actually a cultivated meat cookbook that was released, I think, in the early 2000s. And when I was first interested in the technology, I got that book and I was really excited about just kind of learning what they would be talking about. And you'd open it up, and it was a really cool project, but you'd open it up, and one of the recipes was like how to create a sweater out of cultured meat.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I've called this the first cultivated meat cookbook. I guess I'll have to change that now. But
Yeah.
yeah. The knitting needles. I remember that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so there was all this kind of like very abstract, not food related things that you can create with cultivated meat. And so I thought, it's actually time for the industry to have an actual cookbook dedicated to the products that are coming out. And that was that where the idea came from. And I wanted to I didn't want to completely dismiss the fact that people referred to it as lab grown meat. And so we've called it A Scientist's Cookbook. And in my previous startup, we were doing a lot of food science and laboratory experiments where we would create different types of plant-based meats and different types of products. And everything was done very scientifically. You measure everything out in grams, and you kind of have a very specific scientific protocol for each recipe. And so that's how the recipes in this book will be published. I want to go back to originally saying that it was supposed to be for teenagers. Well, once I started doing research and talking to different folks about different recipes that we were testing or the concept in general, what I found was that there was actually a lot of teenagers that had way better cooking skills than a lot of the adults that I talked to.
Okay.
So it didn't really make sense to target the book just to teenagers, because I feel like whether you're a teenager and you're good at cooking, or if you're an adult and all you know how to do is microwave things, you could benefit from following these kinds of these recipes. And so that's kind of where the idea from the book came out. About a year ago, I put a LinkedIn post asking for recipe testers, and about 80 or so people reached out, and it kind of gave me the motivation to say, hey, let's do this. I think a lot of those testers might have thought I'm sending them cultured meat samples, so they were a little bit overly enthusiastic. But the book is being kickstarted, and I'm sure you'll throw the link in there. A lot of people, since I've launched this, a lot of people have been asking me, don't you cook with it in the same way, right? And that's actually not always the case, right? Just because you have a chicken breast doesn't mean you can cook a chicken breast the same way you would cook even a plant-based chicken alternative. Like, each of these products will have different instructions. They'll come in different form factors. They'll come in different, SKUs. And so, we're going to be highlighting different recipes that, to me, are very exciting, either things that I love to cook myself, or different kind of cultural experiences that I've had that were very meat-centric. And all of the recipes will be either vegan or vegan with cultured meat. And so I'm really excited about this. It's really a passion project. I have been, the first book is on Amazon. It's in a couple bookstores here and there, but it's not, some sort of hugely distributed thing. And so with this book, it's also a passion project that we want to try to build out and get into the hands of those who are very interested in having it and playing with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the story of the thought of the children's book, and I mean, it's very clever, the framing of that one, with the where the hot dogs come from and the picture of the cow on the front and everything, because it's setting people up to be horrified that this is going to be showing their kids the slaughterhouse, and then that's the expectation when they are discovering, oh, okay, actually this is talking about a different production method. So it's kind of puts it, it's like the reality versus expectations meme, where you're kind of you're set up by what you're expecting when you go in, and then you're pleasantly surprised as a result. And I know in the cookbook you've got recipes that are like quite interesting, diverse recipes from all around the world and everything else. It's a big departure from, well, yeah, either like the very freaky knitted sweater out of meat kind of thing that was in the original cookbook, and also like the burgers and the chicken burgers and the hot dogs that are normally the kind of products that we're talking about here. So what was your thinking in terms of making the framing like very global and traditional dishes and everything else? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think, for cookbooks, you can go in a variety of different ways, a variety of different niches. And, for this book, the niche itself is the cultivated meat, right? So I felt like with the actual recipes, I didn't have to have too much of a very strict theme.
Mm-hmm.
And as somebody who loves cooking, I can tell you that the things that I love to cook, I cook the best. And so that's kind of where the idea came from of having kind of recipes that are maybe international, things that I have tried. Some of the recipes come from conversations I've had on the podcast. One of them is a I originally used to call it a Nigerian stew, but now I call it a Nigerian inspired stew. My close friend and college roommate would always make this chicken stew, and I still make that at least a couple times a year, and really love to have it. Nowadays, I'm using either daring chicken or actually Asian supermarkets have some amazing plant-based drumsticks
Oh, cool.
that are really good. But having recipes like that, I think, allows me to actually create recipes that I'm really passionate about for this book. I called it Nigerian inspired because I had somebody on the podcast who is from Nigeria, and I asked him what the official name of that stew is called, and he's like, "Look, we have like so many different languages and groups and within Nigeria that it's not just one thing, and we have lots of different types of it." And so that that is something I love to cook and share with people, and being able to do that with cultivated meat, I think is going to be really exciting. Now, here's the kicker, right? I don't have just a bunch of cultivated meat to cook with, and most people won't either. And so each recipe will have a QR code. And actually, I showed you blank pages, but there are some sample prints as well in here. And so each recipe will have a QR code. And if you scan the QR code, it takes you to an online portal that shows you where you can purchase the cultivated meat for that recipe near you. And if there's no cultivated meat available around you at the time, something we plan to continue to update, if there's nothing around you at the time, then it'll show you good plant-based products, CPG products that are available. Maybe if there's time and budget, we'll even go beyond that and show you how to make some mock, I don't want to call it mock meat, but plant-based meat alternatives at home in the home kitchen. But that might be just a couple individual recipes anyways. And so when we were creating that part, it actually kind of dawned on me that there will be certain places where the products are banned. And so why not actually also showcase, if you're going to enter your zip code or geographic or region or whatever it may be, why don't you showcase the legislators in your area that could actually maybe do something about it, lifting the bans or push to talk about this technology. And so in addition to where you're going to be able to find similar or like products for the recipe, we'll also kind of highlight different types of legislators you might be able to reach out to talk about this technology, so you can get this type of food in your grocery stores nearby. I think in the next 10 to 15 years from now, those QR codes are going to matter a lot more than now. but that's kind of the goal of the project.
Very cool. Well, you're giving yourself a long-term mission there. You're going to be updating those pages in 10 years going, God, why did I do that bloody QR code thing?
Yes. I'm hoping the AI will do that at that point.
Oh, true. Yeah. All right. You'll be all right then. Hey. Nice. So you mentioned that culture meat can cook differently, I guess, depending on how, like, its exact composition and presume there's different levels of fat and water and all this kind of thing. Have you seen chefs doing interesting things with cultivated meat that would be like cultivated meat exclusives kind of thing?
Yeah. So most of the time, you mentioned actually that a lot of times when companies are showcasing the products that they make, they showcase very familiar items like,
Mm,
uh, a burger or a hot dog or whatever it may be. Dumpling to me is the most masked one of them all, right? Because then you don't actually see any of the product.
right.
Um, um, but but there are a lot of kind of interesting things that you'll be able to do and make changes to. One example is not directly a cultivated meat example, but is Just Egg. So Just Egg, which I believe now is starting to get into Europe and the UK. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe that it is one of these annoying things that's held up in a regulator. Even though it's plant based, right? It's like the rule is in Europe, and we've inherited in the UK. It has to go through a long, laborious novel foods approval process if it was not widely consumed prior to May 1997. That's the
Oh man.
cut-off. So yeah, that's. I think they're ready to go in the UK certainly, but they're being held up in this lengthy process. But yeah, I had some in the States, and it's very cool. Just Egg, I like it a lot.
Yeah, so that cooks very much like an egg, and it's kind of you know productized form, and I think it's great. But I recently got the isolate pea protein powder isolate from Just. They kind of make one for as a protein powder, and I started experimenting that in the blender and different types of cooking methods. And I was actually amazed at what kind of just egg-like products I could make with that, right? And then you add a little bit of other types of protein, and I was able to make really exciting meat-like products with that. And so I think to start, what we'll see is that there will be different types of SKUs that are directly like those types of products. So you're going to have ground or mince or whatever it may be. Even those are cooking kind of differently than the meat counterparts. If you have Beyond Meat and you throw it in a pan, you'll probably follow the same instructions for the most part. But if you add a little bit of water, maybe it'll start breaking down. If you have a traditional type of ground beef, then it might be a lot oilier than the Beyond Meat, and so it is different, right? And so I think one thing that I'm excited to kind of showcase and highlight is how you can make the best possible dish with the products that do become available now. It's really it's really based off of to what those products that are released will be like, and but to say that it's going to be a one-to-one to existing types of animal agriculture products out there is going to be a little bit different, unless you're making like a taco or something like that, right?
Okay, super interesting. So there will be some differences in most cases that call for slightly different cooking protocols and so on. That's an interesting thing to note. Um, I'm trying to think anything else I can ask you about the book. I'll tell you what you've having done your Culture Meat podcast for many years at this point, and you've run many interviews. What would you ask if you were interviewing Alex Shirazi?
Oh man. um I think that's a great question. I think um I would really like to ask about, you know when and one thing I actually like about your show is that you get pretty critical about a couple things, right? And I think I would probably ask myself about maybe what are the things that we can talk about the industry that are most critical, and really challenge it. Um, and it's kind of, um, there's a long list of things that I sometimes think about and think I would never say that on the show, or I would never ask this person that, because I don't have a
You say on my
journalistic
show instead.
background. Right? Yeah, yeah. I don't have a journalistic background, so kind of this I'm usually a nice guy when you're talking to people, and so I guess what I would ask myself is really, where are the gaps, the flaws, that are in the industry, and I'll have to think about which ones that we could talk about. I mean, you even just look at the Mr. Beast episode, right? There's this guy, Vegan Hacks podcast. Have you heard of that guy?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of an interesting guy. I do love kind of watching his crazy experiments. But he started talking about how Mr. Beast has some investors that are the same investors as Upside Foods, and that's why they did it. I mean, I didn't look into it or anything like that, but that would be one very interesting criticism to kind of open up, right, and talk about that. I also noticed that when they were talking about their cells in cold storage, I think he mentioned it's a -80 freezer, but I think it's a lot deeper. It's a lot colder than a -80, what he was showcasing. So it makes me think like, okay, how much of this episode where they're showcasing what cultivated meat is the actual reality, right? And he was dumping some of that essentially serum or kind of glucose solution.
Right,
And
they
he
had it as
says
if he was making
cultured meat.
yeah.
I'd love to kind of sit down and talk about which of that was maybe distilled to be, I shouldn't use the word distilled in this scenario. How much of that was dumbed down for better,
a bit of artistic license
to be on Mr. Beast, a wide audience of millions
right.
of people, versus something else. I think that's one criticism I have. I think I love what Good Meat 3 is doing, and the fact that they mentioned that it's 3%. I'd love to sit down and really talk about why it's 3 and not 2 or 5, right? So that's kind of something I'd like to talk about, and yeah. So I think those are the kinds of things that I think I would. You said ask myself, but I would want a Vegan 2.0 episode on.
Nice.
Maybe those are the kind of critical things that I'd like to look at. Of course, what I really love over the last couple of years is that there have been these what do they call it? They call it like moratoriums or startup obituaries, so to speak, where the founders will talk about why their companies have shut down. And I think Josh March with Sci-Fi Foods had a pretty good article that he wrote. There was a really good but podcast episode with Brian Spears of New Age Eats, where he kind of talks about why the company shut down. And so it's really interesting to kind of look at those parts of the industry, because I think we can all learn from that. And yeah, so those are the kinds of things that I think are fascinating topics to get into. I have thought about doing like a sunset series on the podcast where we kind of analyze all the companies that have shut down to kind of figure out why they shut down, how, what decisions were made. So that way we can learn from it. Maybe that's what would be interesting.
Yeah, that's good. I can tell you're a good interviewer, because in the scenario where you were asking yourself a question, you asked a very concise question that made you very uncomfortable to answer it. So that's a good... Yeah, no, I totally agree about discussing the failures and being open about that. Because I think I saw that Josh March guy give a talk at an AVA conference, and I thought, what a cool guy and what a cool thing to do. Like, I would, I don't know if I would be brave enough to do that if my company went under and now I'm going to stand on a stage and tell 1,000 people about why that was and everything that I did wrong. Like, that's very brave, but so important, right? Because that is how we can learn, and sharing those lessons. I mean, it's a very, very brave thing to do, and I think a lot. I learned a lot from that talk, and I think a lot of people did learn a lot from it as well. But yeah, there will always be some casualties along the way in these fast-moving business environments, and yeah, very cool and yeah, brave thing to be open about that and share that. So yeah, I'm sure there is a lot more lessons that could be taken. I don't know how many people you'd have lining up to share them, right? But yeah, that'd be a cool episode if you could get it.
Yeah, I think that's one of those episodes where you're gonna have to run it with or without the without the guest, right? Then it becomes a company analysis.
Yeah, that's right. Well, tell people where they can find you, Alex, and where they can find your Kickstarter and the book and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is on Kickstarter right now. I think we have 10 days to go. We're about 60% of our goal. Really excited to get this printed. I do want to mention that this, what I'm holding now, is just like mostly blank pages. So it's just a test print. We wanted to see, if we should do full bleeds, or if we should have a border, that kind of thing. A scientist's cookbook.com is where all of the information, the QR codes and things like that will be. I want to give a shout out to the photographer and one of the recipe testers, Kathleen Ney. That's not a flattering version, but created this black garlic gyoza recipe, not with cultivated meat, but with plant-based, just as a tester to see if the recipe would be interesting and if there's any gaps in it. So thank you for testing and using, letting me use your photo in here. Scientistcookbook.com, and if you search Cultivated Meat on Kickstarter, you should find it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming to tell me about Alex. I really appreciate you, and I wish you all the best with Kickstarter and with the book.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Awesome. All right, we'll speak soon.